Okay, so what I'm going to try and do is answer some of your questions on the discussion board. And what I'm doing is making a movie of this using QuickTime. And this is a way that you could do a blog by making a movie. And instead of writing, you can make a recording like this and talk about one of the particular topics on the I've given you for the blogs. Okay, so let me get to the questions. And so first, I'm going to answer a question by Zach. And Zach says, I would like to know what the relationship between Hornby and his father was later in life. Did their early relationship build on soccer or last, or did it fall apart? And also, was the sister ever able to form a relationship with her father? Well, I can't really tell you much about the details of Nick Hornby's family life. Interesting thing, though, his father was quite a famous person. His father was Sir Derek Hornby, and he was knighted because of his work for industry and trade. He was the head of various companies. Xerox was one that he was head of. And I think the last particular company he was head of was the London Continental, which was the train company that was responsible for Eurostar, and that's the train that goes under the Channel, under the English Channel to Paris, from London to Paris. So I'm presuming that he still had a relationship with his father. His father was very successful. His father had a second family when he left. He separated from his Nick Hornby's mother when Nick was 11, and he started a new family in France. He worked for various companies all over the place. So he became very wealthy. And Nick went and spent time in France with him. So yeah, I guess he must still have he still had a relationship with his father until he died. He died several years ago at the age of 83, I think. Okay, so next question is from Matthew. And Matthew says, in the language and culture reading, the author mentions how particular meanings of certain objects can be adopted by a speech community. Personally, the image of a Buckeye leaf logo has become associated with American football. Are there any other examples? Well, I guess there are lots of other examples. And I'm just going to tell you one about soccer and football, as it's known in England, and that's a kind of in itself a distinction that the Brits like to make. As you'll read later on, the Brits originally used the word soccer, and it was used quite a lot in Britain until about the 1980s, and then and it kind of fell out of favor because Americans were using soccer. And so the Brits, to kind of distinguish themselves, said, oh, no, it's football. But when in fact, of course, they had used that particular word themselves. Anyway, the particular object I want to talk about is the meat pie. And a meat pie is the staple diet, used to be, probably still is, at most British football stadiums. And that became symbolic of football. And you may have heard of a particular chant called Who Ate All the Pies? And that is a chant that's often used against an opposing player if that player appears to be slightly overweight. And the actual chant goes to the tune of Knees Up, Mother Brown. I don't know if you know that one. It goes something like this, if I can do it. Who ate all the pies? Who ate all the pies? You fat bastard. You fat bastard. You ate all the pies, right? Very synonymous with British soccer. And you could also find quite a good website which is called Who Ate All the Pies. So that's a kind of association. It's similar. I'm sure every sport has particular objects that are associated with it. Here's a question from Josh. I'm not so familiar with sports outside of the 4 to 5 major ones in America. Are there language barriers that I would be forced to knock down should I become involved in a new sport? Yeah, isn't it true of every sport that there's a particular set of words and phrases that you have to know? That's part of entry into the discourse community, and of course you mark yourself as being a member of the community by knowing all those particular words. And so if you think of all the kinds of words that are associated, say, with soccer, a corner, what is a corner? What is offside, which is a very difficult rule to understand, which is a kind of a signifies whether you actually are a member of the discourse community if you know what offside is. Yanlin, a question from Yanlin. Many people think sign language should be non-ambiguous, but as far as I know, sign languages between different countries may vary somehow. So what opinion do you have now? Okay, well, I think you're making a very good point. And it's interesting with sign language, if you look at, British Sign Language, which is different to American Sign Language, which is different to other sign languages in the various particular countries throughout the world. What you find is a similar distribution to spoken languages in terms of the use of arbitrary and non-arbitrary signs. So non-arbitrary signs are what we call motivated signs. So I can't do it. You can't see me doing this, but that's supposed to be an airplane in sign language. Oh, I can do it. Something like that. I don't know what it is, but I mean, that is a motivated sign. It's non-arbitrary. It's very connected. It's iconic. It's an airplane. But of course, sign languages have lots of other arbitrary signs where there's no connection. They're not iconic. What you could say, of course, is that sign language probably has more iconic signs than most spoken languages. Finally, a question from Kaylee, and Kaylee asks, in Language and Culture, Claire Cramsh talks about discourse accent. She gives the example of Americans being socially conditioned to say thank you after someone gives them a compliment, while the French are conditioned to downplay the compliment and minimize its value. Not only the French, but the British too. I had to learn to say thank you when I'm given a compliment and not to self-deprecate. So if somebody says, "Oh, nice shirt you're wearing," an English person would say, "Oh, what? This old shirt? Oh, this is, I've had this for the last 15 years. It's that's self-deprecation. So I've had to learn how to say thank you. One of the most famous, and of course there are many examples of discourse accents and how these vary, of course. Americans might say, let's do lunch, as a parting comment. Of course they don't mean it, it's just a kind of a part of the ritual of greeting and parting. Very famous example of a discourse accent was the downward intonation. A very famous study by a linguist called John Gumpertz, who looked at an immigrant population in Britain in the 1970s. There was a large influx of Indian immigrants into Britain, and this particular study was workers in a canteen or cafeteria at an airplane factory, and well, actually it was an airport. And the Indians who worked in the cafeteria would offer food with a downward intonation. So they would offer gravy. British love gravy, but they would do it a downward intonation. Gravy, gravy. Okay. instead of gravy, with a smile, all right, upward intonation. I myself use a lot of downward intonation, and the problem was that the other workers, the British workers who worked at the airport in that cafeteria, took this as a sign of impoliteness, of rudeness, and of course it wasn't. It was just part of the discourse accent of this particular community of speakers of that particular variety of Indian English. So yeah, lots of examples of that. Okay, great. So thank you for those comments, and I'll be giving you a feedback on Discussion Board 2, but I think maybe you got an idea of what you can do for your blog by making a little recording like this, and instead of writing, talk about the particular prompts that I've given you. Okay, thanks.